I now call upon Heather Kirkwood. She's been waiting for a while from the US. Heather, could you come on?
Oh,
Oh, there she
I'm
is.
on. I
Okay,
think, am I
I'll just
on?
quickly introduce Heather. Heather is a wonderful woman. She's a lawyer based in the United States who has been helping families for years. She's helped many Indian families because typically the Indian expatriate families in the US who are really only there for a few years to, make some savings and then come back to India, they get caught up in the child welfare system when they take their sick or injured children to the hospitals. And certain types of injuries, and Connie had referred to this a little earlier, bone fractures, or, I've also noticed that when the doctors themselves can't understand what happened, you find that they make this into a suspicion of abuse or neglect case, and CPS gets called in. And Heather has been absolutely marvelous in helping us to understand the system, putting parents in touch with experts who can come on as a forensic and scientific and medical experts to explain the injuries and illnesses which are being attributed to parents in these cases. On to you, Heather.
Okay. I actually hadn't planned to speak, so I will make a few comments. I told Siriana I'd be 3 minutes, and I'll try to keep it to that. Connie mentioned that shaken baby syndrome had been debunked. And when I thought last night, should Siriana call on me, I would say that we've won on shaken baby and other issues, medical issues. So why aren't we winning? Because we aren't winning. We have won on the merits, the medicine and science. She asked me about the last year. I can't even remember what I did in the last year. I do know that another a doctor on the call, Ted Harriton, and I reactivated a case in which Tony Davis is facing execution for crimes that did not occur, both rape and shaking. So or impact. So I call them rape and shakes. We've had several of them. We've been successful in some, but it's a complete misinterpretation of medical findings. So we won, and so why aren't we winning? I don't look at years, I look at decades. I've been in this for 2 decades now, going into the 3rd decade. At the beginning of the 1st decade, shaken baby syndrome was absolutely accepted. I'm just going to use it as an example. It's really almost symbolic of all of the medical issues in this area. It was very simple. As I have said, my dog could diagnose shaken baby syndrome with a little bit of tutoring. Just 3 findings: subdural hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage, and anything wrong with the brain. It was thought at that time to be torn axons. That has all been disproven. So there I was in 2000, faced with a case in which a Hispanic family believed very strongly, and indeed the Hispanic community, that the defendant who had been convicted was not guilty. So that's when I began to look at it purely from an evidentiary standpoint. I'm a lawyer, so I look at evidence. That's all I do. I don't even, I'm not even sure I'm very sympathetic necessarily with the parents. I just look at evidence on this side, evidence on that side. So what I had to do then was find the research basis for shaken baby. So this is the very first case. What is a research basis for shaken baby? Because then I could take an autopsy report. Even if I wasn't familiar with the terminology, I can Google with the best of them. And then I could figure out if those findings met the autopsy report. That's all I was doing. It never once occurred to me that there might not be a research basis. My son was at Oxford at the time, and being American, he thought that those long periods between the sessions were for basically playing in his rather good rock band. I thought he should do something else, like help me on this research. So he did. And so for 3 months, he looked at the research basis for shaken baby syndrome. All I wanted for him to do was to give me the research basis for the findings. What findings were diagnostic, pathognomonic, suggestive, whatever. What is the research basis? 3 months, he came back and he said, there is no research basis for shaken baby syndrome. And my response was, I said to my daughter, $100,000 on an Oxford education, he can't find the research basis for shaken baby syndrome. I want my money back. So I redid his research, and many others have also. Essentially, the Swedes did a larger version of the same thing, and they found no research basis for shaken baby syndrome. And that's really pretty much agreed now. So why is it thriving? It's really thriving. The first decade, it seemed to be falling apart. We went from 2001, which is about when I began, to absolutely dispositive, very simple diagnosis. Anybody could make it, a pediatrician, ER doctor, they could make it on the spot. The minute the CAT scan came in, you make the diagnosis, that's it. That shifted. Every element, I give longer talks on this, but every element basically was demolished. And there was agreement. There is actual agreement between the sides that there are many, many alternative causes for each of these findings. That's agreed now. Total shift. I mean, it went in 2011 to Carol Jenne, who is a leader of the shaken baby hypothesis, to no reputable pediatrician would diagnose abuse based on the triad, those 3 findings. They have to go through a very complicated system of looking at everything. Cases were coming down that shaken baby syndrome is an article of faith rather than a precept of science. So the field was wide open. Then came the Swedish report, which found exactly the same as my son did, no research basis for shaken baby syndrome. You would have thought that that might have been huge, but instead it provoked a backlash. So now, guess what? We're back to the triad for shaken baby. It's not called the triad anymore. You only need one of them. You don't need all 3. And you can have any other assortment of findings, which is called the constellation.
Sorry,
The constellation.
Heather, I'm
Yeah.
just going to stop you there, because if you can
Oh,
explain for our audience,
good.
what was the triad, the 3 symptoms that were taken as
Oh, okay.
evidence, and
Yeah.
also when you use the expression no research basis, what
Yes.
exactly do you mean?
Okay. The three findings are subdural hemorrhage, which is a bleeding outside the brain, not inside the brain, outside the brain. So that was thought to require great force. It was thought to be caused by the rupture of bridging veins, requiring tremendous force, equivalent to a motor vehicle accident or a fall from a multi-story building. And that's a testimony that was given in court. I'll just give one example of why we know that's not true. First of all, research by Jenne and Geddes in 2001, in which subdural hemorrhage was found in a wide array of natural causes, including infection, sepsis, you name it. 2008, I think, was Rooks, which found that 46% of normal asymptomatic children had subdural hemorrhage at birth. So we've got 50%. And that almost 50% of children are born with it, which means that if they go to the hospital and have a CAT scan in the first weeks or months, they're likely to have a subdural hemorrhage, and the parents are likely to be accused of abuse, almost certainly, actually. So that's subdural hemorrhage. Retinal hemorrhage is a little bit of bleeding behind the eyes, retinal veins. Many, many causes for that. We've always known that. High altitudes, you get retinal hemorrhages. Any lack of oxygen, you get retinal hemorrhages. We've known that forever. So it used to be before CAT scan, they used retinal hemorrhages as a sign of subdural hemorrhage because they didn't have any way of looking inside the body other than through surgery. So retinal hemorrhage is just, it marches in tandem with subdural hemorrhage. It's not an additional finding, but it is viewed as such. And then we have brain encephalopathy. It's been interpreted as almost anything from vomiting, but the actual theory was that the axons in the brain were ruptured, torn, all of them, diffuse axonal injury. Axons ruptured throughout the brain more than in a motor vehicle accident, more than in a fall from a multi-story building. And that also was disproven. It was shown to be hypoxia, again by Jenne and Geddes, 2001. As my son said at the time, this should have stopped with Geddes, 2001. So we knew all that.
And Heather,
Right.
wasn't one of the triad also that you should find fractures in the neck?
Oh, Oh, heavens, no. No, that would be altogether too logical. That this is a problem with your education. One would expect if one is violently shaking a baby with the force of a fall from a multi-story building or a major motor vehicle accident, they show the head, the neck going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But no, there is rarely neck injury. No, no. So it is a mystery. It is indeed a mystery how that can possibly occur. It's actually absurd. Also, the biomechanical studies showed that human beings cannot generate these type of forces. The force of maximum shaking is, I think, equivalent to or less than a 1-foot fall. It was said that it requires a multi-story fall. In fact, shaking is equivalent to a 1-foot fall. So there you have it. It should be gone, but it's back. So what happened with the Swedish report, my perspective had always been the lack of research basis, not all the alternatives. Yes, there are many alternatives, and of course I do that too. But basically, the lack of evidence, just the sheer mythology of shaken baby syndrome, that's what's always fascinated me. So the Swedes did a study on it, came out 2016, 2017 in English, and found no research basis. So that has been vigorously combated by those who promote shaken baby, or in its new variation. They renamed it abusive head trauma. They turned it into constellation, none of which has any more research basis than the initial one, but it has created what I call a grand mess, because anything can be thrown in, absolutely anything. You can just have one of the triad. If you have subdural, you will almost certainly have retinal, so you usually get two. You can have perfectly well children who recover immediately, and they're still being thrown into the shaken baby abusive head trauma. Now, we had a couple of great events in the last 2 years. We're into the third decade, okay? So I've done the first 2 decades. We're into the third decade. The really great things that have happened are 2 great movies. One is Mrs. Chatterjee, and the other is Take Care of Maya. And anyone who hasn't watched it should do so. It's about Munchausen's renamed medical child abuse, but it's really about the child abuse pediatrics. I really think that there is no solution to this in America, at least, unless the child abuse pediatricians are either severely redirected or decertified, because that's where it's coming from.
Here, here.
There I have it. Okay,
Thank you so
I'm
much,
done.
Caitlin.